section, I want to talk about the importance of having an open throat. The best singers all sing with an open throat. That's one of the reasons why they sound so good, and one of the reasons why people who don't sing with an open throat don't sound so good. An open throat provides a free passageway for the air to travel through. It also provides more space in the mouth and throat for the tone to resonate in. You open the throat by allowing the larynx to drop down and lowering the back of the tongue. If you look in a mirror and gently pull the back of the tongue down, you'll notice how the upper palate automatically raises with it. But in singing, this should never be done mechanically. It has to happen naturally, and it happens naturally when the notes are produced properly. The throat must always be in a relaxed state. A raised palate also stops too much air escaping through the nose. The less air that goes into the production of a note, the more concentrated it'll be and the better it'll sound. Many singers insist that to get a proper open throat there should be a groove running along the tongue from the tip of it to the back of the throat. Well, I'm not sure that this is always necessary, but it definitely helps for the high notes because it creates more space in the throat and makes the tone much richer. Anyway, it's always a good idea to practice relaxing the tongue and trying to get control over it. There's probably no other, I'm pretty sure there's no other muscle used in singing that is more difficult to control than the tongue itself. And a good way to practice relaxing the tongue is to practice in front of a mirror, doing scales in front of a mirror and keeping an eye on the tongue to make sure that it's relaxed. Some people seem to be fortunate enough to be able to sing with a nice naturally open throat without having made any efforts to learn how to do it. But too many singers tend to sing with a tightened throat which blocks the passage of air going through it. One should really pay a lot of attention to singing with a nice open rounded throat, and one way to open it naturally is to assume the feeling that you're about to yawn. But only go for the feeling of the start of the yawn, not the ending of it. That's a stiffening feeling. The jaw, the tongue and the lips must be kept flexible and relaxed at all times. Another way to open the throat is to imagine that you're pleasantly surprised to see someone. You'll notice that when you do this, that not only does the throat open, but you inhale high in the head, sending the air to the brain and deep down into the lungs. It incorporates the opening of the cavities feeling that you get when you smell the roses. But more than that, it seems to expand the whole body without making it tense. Another exercise for stretching the throat muscles naturally is the dog panting exercise I showed you earlier. But keep the passage of air high. Don't gasp it through the throat. Now, just as you will have noticed how the neck and throat muscles automatically respond to these images you create for yourself, such as yawning, being pleasantly surprised and dog panting, so does the voice itself respond to the images of sound that you create in the mind. This is why I can't stress enough the importance of hearing the sound before you produce it. If you listen to singers practice, you notice that most of the time they practice scales with the R sound. This is because it's a very open sound. This sound requires that you widen the space at the back of the mouth, and it also helps you develop the practice of trying to keep the throat open while you're singing. It also adds a sense of roundness to the tone. You'll notice that when doctors look into your throat, they generally get you to say ah. That's because this sound seems to open the throat the most. Also, if you were to look at your throat in the mirror and say ah, you'll notice that the tongue automatically flattens and the soft palate raises. That's the open throat. So let's move on. I suppose that if there is one particular thing that prevents very good amateur singers from becoming very good professional singers, It's an inability to sing good, strong high notes. I would say that this is the main shortcoming that stood in the way of my reaching my lifelong ambition to become an international opera star. For opera singers especially, it's the ability to reach the high notes that gets you the jobs. Had I known what I'm passing on to you now about how to develop high notes when I was younger, I think I would have made it. In my earlier years, I never had any notes that sounded good above A flat. They were either forced or sounded blatant. The reason for this is that I was always trying to take the notes from below instead of from the top. During the 9 years I studied with my first teacher, taking generally 3 lessons a week, he never once told me to take the sound from the head. In fact, he taught against this, suggesting that that was the method used by tenors who had thin voices. Because this teacher often used to say, the higher the building, the lower the foundations need to be, I tended nearly always to try to start the notes from down here instead of from up here. The fact is that you can't get the high notes properly unless they're placed in the frontal sinuses. But to get to these particular sinuses, the air has to travel a greater distance and through a more intricate and narrower bone structure passage than the ones leading to the middle and lower sinuses. That's why it generally takes quite a bit of practice to direct the breath through them. But if you understand the principles of singing, it's not as hard to get the voice up there as one might think. If one tries to push the air into the sinuses, it won't go through because there's only a very thin passage it can travel through. Consequently, there's a reflex pressure on the throat muscles which causes them to tighten. Then you start to force the sound. It stands to reason that the more intricate and narrow the passage, the more the necessity to draw the air through rather than push it. If you can't find a comfortable placing for a certain note, it might simply be because you've never done it before. Most people are not used to singing high notes, especially soft high notes. Once you've experimented enough, practiced enough, and got it right a few times, the mere hearing and sensing of the note in your mind should be enough to motivate your singing muscles to call on muscle memory to produce the sound you want. If you can learn to get the note right occasionally, then you know that it's possible. From there on, you need to practice hearing the note before trying it, and then keep practicing until it becomes easier. Eventually, you should be able to have that note available at will. If the high notes are not pouring out as they should, check that your jaw is loose. The higher you go, the more important it is to drop the jaw and preferably have it tucked in. Make sure that your chest and shoulders are not tense also. While it's good to feel emotional intensity in the chest, you mustn't try to place the voice there. The voice when singing high notes should be right out of the body. You should check that your upper palate is going up. Also, check what's happening to your tongue. Except when you're singing the E sound, the tongue should be lying flat. There's probably no better way of developing the high notes than by singing scales. However, I must admit that doing scales can be boring. When practicing, I much prefer to work on difficult phrases from songs and arias. Nevertheless, I firmly believe that you and I would both sing better if we sang more scales. To break the boredom, try singing different types of scales and vary the vowel sounds. You can start by singing full scales, finishing at the top like this. You can also cover the scale by leaving a few notes out in between, like this. You can also vary the tempo. Since our aim here is to develop the high notes, It's probably best to do the run-ups quickly and lightly, and then get used to sustaining the high notes at the end, like this. But when you do this, it's best to make sure that the bottom note is well produced first. The highest note should be contained in the lowest. What this means is that if you're going from a low note to a high one, make sure the lower note is placed in the frontal sinuses so that there won't be any interference in the transition between the notes. Start on a note that you feel very comfortable with. Make sure you've established a mental image of a nice sound before you start, and get the note between the eyes. Another exercise you can do to extend your range is the laughing exercise. This one. This exercise serves to connect the diaphragm with the sinuses and upper cheeks without allowing any time to stiffen the body. It's a great exercise for getting brightness in your high notes. The brighter the notes are, the more exciting they are to listen to. The cheeks are raised a little, as is natural when you laugh or smile, but they should be without tension. You have the feeling that you've become very broad in the face. You also get a sort of wide feeling in the throat, but wide as in the same sense that a doctor might say, open wide when he or she wants to look in your throat. It's wide in a round sense. It's not stretched out at the side. To avoid the likelihood of any rigidity in the cheeks in this exercise, be careful that the tone is focused between the eyes and that the sound comes out with as much hilarity as possible. When you've mastered the ha-ha-ha-ha exercise, you can try this one. That's got to be done with a very loose jaw. Like the ha-ha-ha-ha exercise, it puts resonance in the cheeks. It also gives the effect of biting the note. This is an exercise that Pavarotti advocates. He says, for high notes, the muscles must bite. If you listen to the best tenors, particularly Italian tenors, you'll notice that nearly all of them tend to bite on the high notes. Caruso is a great exponent of this technique. If you listen to his recordings, you'll notice that nearly every high note he sang seemed to be gripped in a vice. Listen to this. Yet his tones were always flexible, never rigid. Chili was another great tenor who seemed to bite his high notes with that same flexible quality. Listen to him. It's very common to hear top singers openly state that they deliberately change the shape of the high notes to make the sound freer and easier on the ear. Thus, ah becomes or, as in, oh, sweet mystery of life, at last I found you. I becomes oi, as in, and I shall hear you whisper, oh, and the E sound sounds like oo, as in, because you speak to me. What we're doing here is simply rounding the tone. The oo sound is considered to be the easiest sound of all to make on the high notes. If you experiment with ah and oo, you'll notice that whereas it takes a conscious effort to stop the ah sound from being placed at the back of the throat, the oo sound seems to go forward naturally. However, these differences should be subtle. You have to find the balance between colouring just enough to get the voice forward and not making it too obvious that this is what you're attempting to do. Since the oo sound is the easiest to sing on high notes, it's a good idea to work on this sound first. It brings the tone more forward than any other vowel. The more forward the voice is placed, the easier it is to take the voice higher. Once you've mastered the oo sound, it'll be easier to master the others. As a matter of fact, you will have noticed when listening to the very great singers that all the vowels sound virtually the same at the very top of their range, especially with sopranos. The ring in the voice makes the differences almost indiscernible. Genie himself said, "On high notes, the transition from vowel to vowel is hardly noticeable. It's oily smooth." If you're going from a not so high note to a very high note, make sure that you have the high note established in the lower note beforehand. In other words, have it placed high and forward, but above all make it light. The lighter you take the lower note, the easier it'll be to take the high one and the better it'll sound by contrast. The kind of feeling you should have in the lower note is that you're taking aim for the higher one. Bad high notes are usually the result of bad preparation. Also, try to relax the body before taking a phrase or high note. At the end of songs and arias, you're normally given 1 or 2 fractions of a second to do this in order to punctuate the phrase or note. Even a fraction of a second's relaxation can make a big difference to the quality of the sounds that follow. Remember also what I said near the beginning of the video. Keep the body in constant motion. A slight movement of the jaw, a turn of the body or a gesturing of the hand can suffice to loosen up an otherwise rigidly set and thus blatant sounding high note. Make an effort to welcome the high notes with enthusiasm and energy, and without fear of hesitation. Embracing them with enthusiasm helps to activate the whole being. For instance, you can imagine that you're embracing someone that you're really thrilled to see. This warm, happily relaxed feeling will then be conveyed in the sounds you make. Try also to get the feeling of filling the whole head with sound. This is a good tip to bear in mind for all your singing, not just the high notes. You should learn to sing your high notes with the same confidence you have when you sing your middle notes. However, I must admit that this is easier said than done. The famous Italian tenor Franco Corelli made a very apt statement. He said, "When the voice is placed right, singing is like walking. You don't usually think when you walk, but if you're climbing the stairs, you'd better pay attention to the steps or you'll fall." I must say I agree with him. When you sing high notes, the back of the tongue and the larynx should naturally drop to allow more space in the throat, and the pipe from the larynx down shortens slightly. You can actually make this happen comfortably by raising your arms when you sing sustained high notes. This naturally shortens the neck and relaxes it. If you've ever seen opera in Italy, you will have noticed that it's common for singers, especially tenors, to raise their arms when singing the top notes as a gesture of expression. Something like this. It seems to give you more space in the throat, loosens the neck, raises the chest and shortens the windpipe from the larynx down. To give the high notes more intensity, you could try imagining that you're pulling in the sound as a counterforce to its flowing out. This is what a great many singers, including Pavarotti as I mentioned earlier, refer to as drinking the tone. But this pulling in sensation is really a control of the airflow. Remember, the sound itself must never be carried back into the head. In fact, the higher you sing, the more the sensation there is of the voice being distanced further from the head. Enrico Caruso, the tenor that most great tenors would call the greatest, said that when he sang, he had a sensation of having a hole going out of the back of his neck. But this mustn't be confused with the sound going in that direction. His sounds were always placed high and forward. The hole in the back of the head sensation would have come from feeling the muscles in the back of the throat and neck as they helped to pull the tongue down and raise the upper palate, which in turn gave him a very cavernous open throat. If you haven't practiced your high notes for a while, after you've sung a lot of them, you might finish up the next day with some sore muscles at the back of the neck. As long as the throat and particularly the cords aren't sore, don't worry. It's quite natural for muscles you haven't used for a while to get sore. However, you can cut down the likelihood of this happening if you warm up the muscles with some light exercises before you work on the difficult stuff. And now I'd like to finish this section on high notes with some very special tips. When you sing your very high notes, imagine that there's a column of air running through your body which extends at least down to the knees. In fact, Anna Moffo says she feels it going down to her feet. She says, you extend the column of air as high and as low as you can. Try to develop this feeling. It will give you a feeling of making the sound both full and anchored. Also, when you have difficulty with some high notes, try bringing the back into play. No lesser a singer than the great Marilyn Horne says that when you go for an extremely high note, the back stiffens. It goes very straight. Many singers claim that this is where they get their vocal strength from. I notice particularly that the best baritones use their back muscles a lot when they're singing at the top of their range. To take some of the tension away from sustained high notes, try walking around on the balls of your feet. This also gives the feeling of keeping the sound in motion, just as the body is in motion. I'm talking about when you practice, of course, not when you're performing. You can also practice walking backwards with a slightly bent knees. The bent knees creates the feeling of grounding the voice, while walking backwards gives you the feeling of leaving the voice in front of the body. You would look pretty silly if you did this during a public performance, but it's okay to practice this way if it's going to give you confidence in making the notes come easier. Lastly in this section, I want to mention consonants. Consonants in high notes should be as light and short as possible to get them out of the way and prevent any interference with the flow. Many a potentially good high note can be spoiled by overemphasizing consonants. Good diction is very important, but there's no need to stress it. Lastly, I want to mention consonants. Consonants in high notes should be as light and as short as possible to get them out of the way and prevent any interference with the flow. Many a potentially good high note can be spoiled by overemphasizing consonants. Diction is vitally important, but there's no need to stress it. Rules for singing low notes are basically the same as for all other notes, excepting that most of the sound travels through the sphenoid or lower sinuses, and with very, very low notes the sound only seems to come out through the mouth. Nevertheless, although the sphenoid sinuses are set lower than the other two sets, excepting for the very, very low notes, you still need to get the sound high and forward to produce the best low notes. But just think high, don't push high. This is the secret to producing really good low notes. The common misconception is that low notes are placed in the chest. Because of this, often there's a tendency to press the notes down into it. Don't do that. It spoils the sound quality. The opening passage for air entering the sphenoid sinuses is actually quite high in the head. In fact, the opening is actually situated higher in the head than the opening passage for the high notes. By thinking high when you sing low, you'll automatically raise the upper palate, which opens the throat and allows air to flow more freely into the sinuses. It's a good practice to sing low notes as if you were about to speak. Hear the pitch of the notes before you sing them. And as I keep saying, never push or force them. Check that the jaw is kept loose, particularly when you're singing your very lowest notes. If you make a physical effort to persuade the voice to go forward, you're likely to stiffen the jaw and lips. If you want your very low notes to be resonant and vibrating, you must keep the jaw and lips very loose. You could try practicing your low notes with a circular movement like this. La, la, la. This gives the feeling of flexibility, but don't reduce the intensity as you go down. Don't let the energy sag. Basses and altos would do well to practice some of their scales in reverse. In other words, instead of going up the scale, go down. Start on a comfortable note and slowly work your way down from there. Something like this. La, 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 la. 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 I'm no bass. A special message for those with natural deep voices. Never artificially depress the larynx. Many young singers with low voices tend to do this in order to make their voices sound more mature. Just as you should never force the voice, you should never try to force maturity, or you're likely to shorten the voice's life. In the field of artistic singing, what separates the sheep from the goats is the ability to increase or decrease the volume of the notes you're singing. This is where real artistry comes in. It's said that you haven't fully developed your voice until you can increase or decrease the volume of the notes at will. Unfortunately, this is not something I worked on much in my younger days. This is mainly because I was always focused on my struggle with trying to get the high notes. But then I suppose it's not much use trying to increase or decrease the volume of a note until you're able to produce it properly. Even now, to be honest, this is not one of my stronger points. But then again, I'm comforted by the fact that not all that many famous tenors have completely mastered it either. To do this, you need to have excellent breath control. It's easier to increase the volume of the sound if you understand what needs to happen for it to come about. Vocal sounds are increased in volume when the pair of so-called vocal cords, acting like valves, are separated further apart and allow a bigger column of air to come into action. The correct sensation for a crescendo, then, is a feeling of expansion, but never a feeling of pressure. If you try to force the air out, it sends it into a forward direction, but not upwards. As a consequence, a large proportion of the air is forced out of the mouth without being set into tonal vibration. Understanding this is very important, so I'll repeat it. To increase the volume, you need to separate the vocal cords and let more air flow through. Conversely, you reduce the sound by closing these valves. The famous American soprano Roberta Peters once said that she always practiced mezzo voce, that is half voice, because if you could produce a very small sound and crescendo it and then come back, your vocal cords must be working. Since she referred to the cords as vocal cords, I would presume from a statement that, like so many other successful opera singers, she wasn't aware that the cords don't make sounds, but she was obviously well aware of how important a role they play when increasing and decreasing volume. The production of the tone is precisely the same for both soft notes and loud notes. Pavarotti has said that when he goes from forte to pianissimo, there's no change in the vocal production, just less breath. However, I wouldn't try to increase or decrease the volume mechanically. You can really only achieve it by willing it to become louder and softer. However, the voice won't respond to the will if it isn't placed right. So the first rule of crescendos and decrescendos is to get the voice placed correctly so that it can flow. If you try to sing softly the wrong way, you create problems. I think I've already made it clear where the voice needs to be placed. The second rule is that more than any other times when singing, you'll need to imagine hearing the sounds before you can produce and control them. This is essential. It should also be understood without saying that the first attempts to get a crescendo from a soft note should be made at a comfortable pitch. I must confess that mastering this technique is not quite as simple as one might make it seem. It will only come about after lots of concentrated practice. This is why there are so few singers that can claim to have perfect control of their voices. Also, keep in mind that the control you have of the sound will be very much enhanced by putting lots of expression into your singing. After all, the aim is to sing, not just to produce noises. Concerning airflow, the major difference between the control of the air for volume and the control needed for pitch is that when raising the pitch of the voice, the airflow speeds up, just as it slows down for the lower notes. Whereas, as I've just pointed out, to increase the sound, you increase the volume of air passing through the chords without increasing its speed. A gesture that can help you greatly in increasing and diminishing the volume of a note is this circular movement with the arm. Time it so that the volume increases as the hand goes up and out and diminishes as it starts to come down and inwards. Imagine that you're reducing the volume with your hand. There's a sense of gently and steadily pulling in the note as the sound comes to an end. I'll show you again. I discovered through exercising with this gesture that I naturally supported the tones, whereas if I tried to reduce the sound without gesturing, my subconscious tendency was to drop the support and try to reduce the volume using the throat muscles. Soft notes, like all notes, need to be supported. Actually, many singers say that soft notes require far more support than loud ones. An additional value in practicing with this gesture is that while I mentioned earlier that a lot of breath control is necessary for decreasing the volume, exercise in this way will definitely help you master that breath control. Practicing this way will also give you the confidence that you can do it. Once you've done it properly enough times, muscle memory will take over and you'll be able to do it in performance without the hand gesture. If you practice this way in front of a mirror, you'll notice that as you increase the volume, the mouth widens, and as you decrease it, it narrows. There's no way you can keep a large space in the throat when you sing softly either. The throat's more open for loud singing and more focused for soft singing. It's probably best to start singing the notes mezzo piano, which means fairly softly in musical terms. Then increase the volume as loud as you comfortably can before you reduce it. You should practice reducing the volume by as much as you're possibly able to, but don't increase it to its absolute limit or you'll make the sounds harsh. Don't allow the intensity to drop as you diminish the sound either. Keep the energy level high. The fact that you're singing softly doesn't take any of the importance away from the note. In fact, its importance is accentuated. You give less breath when you reduce the volume, but you focus the tone more. Singing pianissimo, that is very softly, is much harder than singing loudly. To produce the best pianissimo sounds, the tone must be round and have a ringing quality. They should be so free that the feeling should be something like that of clouds floating through you. For the transition from one vowel sound to another, for instance, as in the name Maria, I find that it helps if I try to get the E sound sort of spinning in the imposto before I produce the R sound. Now this is something I still haven't mastered, but I'll have a go. Maria. To hear an expert on singing softly, let's listen to the Swedish tenor Nikolai Gedda. Jetta wouldn't be able to produce sounds like that unless his neck and head were totally relaxed and free from tension. In fact, the whole body needs to be tension free. But at the same time, the diaphragm must be involved. The trick is to get the voice properly focused between the eyes, yet at the same time connected to the diaphragm. The jaw should be very loose. Also, make sure that the lower lip is relaxed. Sometimes you can concentrate so much on freeing up one part of the body that you unconsciously stiffen another part. It's not generally necessary to inhale before singing soft notes. If you're relaxed beforehand, the intake of air will come naturally. It's easier to sing soft notes if you use only a little breath. If you're going to think about breath at all, think about taking it smoothly and deeply. Now, it's probably best to start practicing with the oo sound because it's the easiest to get the sound forward and high. Next, you can try opening the sound a bit by singing O and then perhaps go on to ah. When you're singing very soft phrases, think of producing the consonants as high in the head as possible. I don't think it's actually possible to do this, but imagining that that's where they're produced stops the lips from interfering with the flow of the sound. Also, make the consonants as short as possible. Overemphasis of consonants interferes with the flow. With soft singing, you should always aim at the purest sound possible. Remember to hear the sounds before you produce them. The best way to practice soft phrases is to start on notes that you can handle comfortably and then start raising the pitch semitone by semitone. Something like this. Somewhere for me, somewhere for me, somewhere for me, and so on. Don't forget to smell the roses. You're unlikely to have time to do this when you're singing in a performance, and it would look a bit odd if you did do it. But it's a great trick to use when you're practicing. Also, when you're singing very soft notes, it helps considerably if you sing the words with the greatest sincerity and feeling. I believe that this is why God gave us singing voices, so that we can express our thoughts and feelings. So it stands to reason that when we use the voice to do what it was designed to do, we'll be using it to its best effect. It's necessary to understand the difference between pianissimo and falsetto. A falsetto sound is produced with the smallest possible air movement very high in the head. It's totally detached from all the other resonators. It's the place where countertenors place the sounds they make. It's a sort of false voice in the sense that it's not the voice that one usually talks with. I suppose it's a fair comment to say that it's a sort of Mickey Mouse voice. Here Pluto, here Pluto. There's probably no better proof of that than to use Ivan Rebrov as an example. He has a superb natural bass voice, yet he can switch to falsetto with no trouble. His natural way of speaking is deep and resonant. If he spoke in his falsetto voice, everybody would laugh because they would know that it's not natural. The sound, unlike that of the proper voice, is not supported by the diaphragm. Neither can you increase or decrease its volume. Whereas a pianissimo sound can start very, very quietly and purely and be brought to maximum volume while flowing through all the other resonators. Rosa Poncelli said, in pianissimo, you feel as if you're pulling a thin thread through your nose and you don't ever let it slip. She was of course talking about sustained pianissimo notes. If you increase the volume, the thread gets thicker. Singing loudly doesn't mean that you have to force your voice or push the sound out. Too much breath will create rigidity. Neither do you need to take in a lot of breath beforehand. You only need to take in as much air as is comfortable. However, for loud notes, the breath you take in needs to be low, firming up the abdominal muscles and the ones around the waistline. But you must still keep the muscles flexible. Don't think of projecting the sound out either, or you'll force the tone and make it harsh. Said that singing is merely finding the right mouth position for each note. If it was as simple as that, I think there'd be a lot more great singers about. I know that when I sing, I hardly ever give a thought to my mouth, and I guess that the same would apply to most singers. Nevertheless, for interest's sake, it's worth studying. It seems that how wide you need to open the mouth when singing depends on who's doing the singing. I've seen some singers sing brilliant, loud, high notes while hardly seeming to open their mouths much wider than for the notes in the middle of their range. While I've seen other singers make equally brilliant notes with mouths open wide enough to swallow an apple. However, generally we tend to open the mouth wider when we sing higher and louder. Let's say you have a friend called Arnold and you want to attract his attention. If he was only a few feet away, you'd probably hardly open your mouth when you called out. But if he were about 12 or 15 meters away and you wanted to attract his attention, you'd probably open your mouth wider and raise the pitch. The further away he was, the more you'd be likely to open the mouth wider when you call out. Instinctively, your voice would be seeking a larger chamber to reinforce the raised pitch. You don't need to think, how am I going to do this? You just do it. God has programmed the sound-producing organs to respond automatically to our will. This is why it's so important to hear and determine the sound you want to make before you make it. The mouth will automatically respond by finding the right amount of opening needed for your particular voice for each note you produce. As an experiment, you can practice singing a note and then holding it while you open your mouth wider. Then, while holding the note, almost close it. You'll hear how the sound varies. Opening excessively can stifle the voice. It puts stress on the throat and makes clear diction almost impossible, whereas closing the mouth can muffle the sound. When we think of space in the mouth, we should mainly think of vertical space, not horizontal space. I say mainly because I'm only too aware that many great singers, especially the man regarded as the greatest tenor ever, Enrico Caruso, as well as that other great tenor, Beniamino Gigli, they often created wide spaces in their mouths when they sang. But this was more as a consequence of expression rather than a conscious effort to widen the tone. Their throats and their mouths always retain the flexibility that good singing requires. But generally, if you spread the mouth too much, it will affect the voice and make it sound hard. I've heard singers say that the secret of singing well lies in the use of the lips. Well, there's no question that you have to use your lips when forming a tone. You can't sing ah with your mouth in the o position, and if you try to sing the sound eh when the mouth's in the ah position, you'll get into trouble. However, if you strive for a pure sound in the mind, nature will take care of the adjustments. I don't think that you should ever consciously shape the lips to produce the sounds, particularly not the lower lip. This lip should be totally relaxed. You should never push it forward and down like this in an effort to project the sound. If you let your mind dictate the sound that will be produced, the mind will at the same time dictate the amount of movement that the lips should make. Never press the lower lips against the teeth like this. If you try doing this without producing a sound, you can feel how it stiffens the neck muscles. On the other hand, I find that very gently, and I must stress the word gently, raising the upper lip up and outwards serves to assist you in keeping the voice focused high. If you do this, the lower lip will automatically adjust to it. Raising the upper lip with the corresponding adjustment of the lower lip acts as a sort of megaphone for the voice and naturally exposes the teeth, which in turn become resonators and add brightness to the tone. Nevertheless, I wouldn't pay over attention to the lips. Generally, if you hear the sound you want to make before you produce it, the lips will take care of themselves. However, when you're at home practicing, if you find that you're not able to produce the sounds you want, then perhaps then you can do a check on what your lips are doing in case they're letting you down. But whatever you do, don't stiffen the lips. Remember, the movement must never be mechanical. As a safeguard against any mechanical movement of the lips, try putting a slight natural smile on your face while thinking the ooh sound. In other words, take the focus away from here, the lips, and put it up here, between the eyes. When the ooh sound is produced properly, that is, emanating from between the eyes, the lips shouldn't protrude. At the same time, thinking ooh is likely to bring the sound a bit further forward than it might otherwise be. For most of my singing years, I've had difficulty singing the E sound, especially in the higher part of my range. Because of this, I developed the bad habit of emphasizing the sound in an effort to produce it better. I hadn't realized that what I was trying to do was produce the sound mechanically. Consequently, I resorted to widening the mouth and stretching my lips. Yet it was the fact that I was trying to produce the sounds physically and not mentally in the first place that they were not coming out naturally. The universally held view among singers is that you should always put some ooh into your E sounds to round them off. Even now, I still have to be careful not to fall back into old habits with my E sounds. It's time to give some consideration to the formation of vowels. There are several schools of thought on how the vowels are produced. Most singers seem to believe that the lips shape them. Yet Jan Peerce, who was a star tenor at the Metropolitan Opera House, said he didn't believe in the habit of using the lips for making vowels. The famous Italian soprano Licia Albanese, another star of the Metropolitan, also claimed that she didn't use her lips much. She, like many other famous singers, said that the vowels are formed in the throat. A lot of singers will say that they're formed in the mouth, and yet others will say that all of these are involved, which is probably true. Obviously, the tongue is involved in some vowels. It clearly raises when you produce the E sound, and it lowers when you produce the R sound. Tito Schipa, who was one of Italy's most popular and famous tenors of the past, said, "The vowels are small and they drop down from the nose onto the lips." Well, all this has probably done nothing more than confuse you. But the aim of these seeming contradictions is to get you thinking for yourself. In the end, you have to do your own thinking and take control of your own voice. While I don't recommend conscious use of the lips, I can't see how vowel sounds can be changed without their involvement. When singers of the calibre of Jan Peerce and Licia Albanese say they don't use their lips for vowels, I think they must have meant they don't make a conscious effort to use them, just as they wouldn't make a conscious effort to use their tongues. For this reason, I think that Schipa's definition may be the best when he said, "The vowels are small and they drop down from the nose onto the lips." It's a figurative description, but it works because it suggests that the vowels are formed in the imagination rather than by a physical effort. Another factor of singing that I should refer to is diction. There's no question that singing is enhanced by good diction, but once again, good diction is not to be confused with overuse of the lips. Overuse of the lips stiffens them and interferes with the sound flow, as I said before. This overpronunciation of consonants produces a forward directional movement of air through the mouth that interferes with the air current passing into the head cavities. Consonants should be as short as possible, both at the beginning of the words and at the very last moment after the vowel, so as not to interfere with the melodic line. You will have heard of the term bel canto, which translated simply means beautiful singing. Bel canto is a style of singing which focuses on producing smooth melodic lines with a minimum of interference between one vowel and another. You can only achieve this by shortening the consonants. Also, keep in mind that consonants need to be sung in the same pitch as the notes that follow them. That means that consonants, as well as vowels, have to be placed higher and forward and needs to be pulled out, not pushed out. Even the so-called explosive consonants, b, k, p, and k, need to be taken as short and as lightly as possible. The way to do this is to take them high and forward. I used to have trouble singing the highest note in the hymn Panis Angelicus, which I'm often called upon to sing at weddings and funerals. Palpit, palpit. This note's not really all that high, it's only an F sharp. But the reason I had trouble singing it was because I was putting too much emphasis on the P instead of giving it the minimum emphasis. I was using too much lip muscle to produce the P, like this, palpit. Whereas I now take the P very lightly and from the same place that the vowel that follows comes from, up here. If you have problems enunciating from the top, you could try imagining that you're starting your enunciation at the back of the neck and carrying it over the head and forward. It may seem a little over the top, if you'll excuse the pun, but you might find it useful for helping you getting the feeling of getting your diction high and forward. Most of what I've been sharing so far has been to do with developing the voice, but it would be remiss of me if I didn't leave you with some thoughts on how to employ the voice in singing songs. Singing a song, particularly when you're singing to an audience, should be more than just putting words to a melody. It's a form of therapy. If you do it well, you can lift people's spirits with it. If you don't do it well, you can not only annoy your audience, but you can make yourself unpopular as well. There's a saying that if there's anything worse than a good singer who doesn't sing, it's an awful singer who does. When you sing to an audience, you should sing for their benefit, not yours. So, where it's appropriate, make eye contact as you would in conversation. When you're singing a love song, you should be focusing on members of the opposite sex and expressing the warm and vibrant feeling you experience when you're in love. If you're singing introspectively, say about a lost love, or if you're singing a solemn hymn, you may want to close your eyes or focus them on the back wall or some space where your eyes don't link with the person. But if you're singing about how wonderful life is, or what a great world God has given us, make eye contact as if you're inviting the audience to say, "Don't you agree?" If you're not focused on the audience, why should they be focused on you? Singing should excite the audience and give them a good feeling. It can change the mood they're in. It can bring back fond memories. It can make the audience happy for themselves and happy for you that you're not only able to generate happiness for others where you are at the moment, but also for other people in the future. So sing with your whole heart and your whole soul. This way, after you leave your audience, they'll be left with a nice mental picture of you singing as well as a good mental record of the sounds you make. People generally remember what is done mostly when it's done with lots of spirit. And always dress neatly as if to imply that the audience is special and that the particular performance is a special occasion. This way you make your appearance visually appealing as well as orally. Between songs, try to enter a bit of humour. Adding humour to the introduction of your songs helps to relax both the singer and the audience. And when you deliver a song, it's always better to sing from memory. For one reason, it's better for keeping contact with your audience. But more than that, it's a sign that you've devoted some time to making the song your own. There's a saying that an amateur learns a song until he knows it, but a professional learns it until he can't go wrong. When you're reading from music, you're conveying the message that you're still learning the song. and sing the words as if they're your very own thoughts and that they're being communicated for the very first time. It's this skill that I believe leads to certain recordings becoming big hits. It's almost impossible to hear the song Old Man River sung by anyone without thinking of Paul Robeson. No one could sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow without evoking thoughts of Judy Garland, just as you wouldn't hear anyone sing I Walk With God without making a comparison with Mario Lanza. In such cases, the singer becomes almost inseparable from the song. Very few great artists compose the songs they make famous, but the best singers develop the talent of interpreting them as if they did. To enable yourself to do this, you need to fully understand what you're singing about. Convey the feeling of the words as well as the meanings. If you're singing that you love someone, sing from the heart. If you're singing about a city or a country, picture it in your mind so the audience can tell what you're thinking about. If you're singing a hymn, sing believingly so that the audience will be drawn in with you. And don't sing in a language you don't understand unless you have at least a good understanding of what the song is all about and you can successfully pretend that you know what you're singing about. And also give thought to the tempo. Every song has a tempo that's best suited to it. It's a valuable exercise to try to discover what that tempo is. Many songs lose substance simply because they're sung too fast or too slow. You should always pay great attention to the rhythm of a song you're singing and make sure that it's well defined. Each phrase in a song has a melodic shape. It's a good idea when learning a song to break it up into separate melodic phrases, pronouncing and feeling its shape till it's ingrained in your memory. In fact, to sing a song well, its pulse needs to be felt before the song even begins. If you're singing a foreign language that you yourself understand but which your audience doesn't, shaping your phrases properly will go a long way towards expressing the feeling that the composer wanted to convey. Phrases, like the voice itself, should be flexible so that you can play around with them if you feel the need to. Beginners often have a tendency to sing phrases rigidly and all too often put an emphasis on parts of words that are not normally emphasized in speech, particularly the endings of words like temptation and infatuation, which a lot of singers will pronounce as temptation and infatuation. Some singers commonly pronounce the word the. Many overemphasize the li sound at the end of words such as early and lovely, so that they come out early and lovely. The word was is normally pronounced whiz in speech, and so it should be in song. For instance, the sky was blue and not the sky was blue. Overemphasizing like that can make singing stilted and boring. Try not to sing every phrase with the same amount of volume. Varying the volume has the effect of adding light and shade to the song. When the words express tenderness, it enhances the expression if the words are delivered softly. If you want to finish a song loudly, you can accentuate the effect by holding back the volume during the preceding phrase or two. The best singers modulate their voices with a range of tone colours. However, this usually comes naturally and without being conscious of it when the songs are sung with genuine emotion and imagination. Remember that all singing, in all its aspects, physical, emotional and spiritual, must be initiated in the singer's imagination. Remember also to think about what you're singing. Singers talk about feeling each word. Just as many professional actors use the trick of calling on past memories to help them act out situations, you would do well to call on past memories of such things as joy, sorrow, jealousy, bliss, and falling in love to help you feel the emotions you're attempting to express. In my opinion, how you sing is more important than having a great vocal instrument. One would rather hear a great violinist play a cheap violin than hear an awful violinist play a Stradivari. Rather than trying to impress with the voice, we should prepare our voices to respond to the artistic requirements of what we're singing. If the voice is prepared well, we can afford to concentrate more on the delivery of the song than the way we're producing the sounds. In order to give it your best, before you learn a song, you should recite the words over and over, thinking about what you're saying. This will give you a better feeling of the song. To sing with feeling, you need to feel what you're singing about. Mario Lanza said that he sang every phrase as if it were going to be the last phrase he would ever sing. Before you start singing, you should pause for a moment and get yourself ready for it as if you were hearing the song in advance. You should feel as if the words and the tune you're about to sing will come from your own imagination, which in a sense it will. You need to not only get in the mood for the song, but bear in mind that you're getting the audience ready for the song also. It's a sensation you can experience that's been described in the following ways. Like that of a tightrope walker as he steps on the rope. Like that of a listener who hears a mysterious sound on a quiet night. Or like that of an archer the instant before he pulls the arrow. What we should be attempting to do is to have a conscious, accurate control and a complete knowledge of the song we're about to sing. I'd like to inform you about a lot of things that you should not do if you want to sing well. One of those things you shouldn't do is push the voice. People talk about projecting the voice. In my opinion, you shouldn't make a conscious effort to project the voice or you're liable to push it. Doing this may make the voice sound slightly harsh and it's likely to tire the vocal cords. What's more, you'll have difficulty when you come to sing the high notes. Think of producing the tone roundly and with intensity, and the tone will project naturally without any conscious effort to make it do so. It's better to think of the tone flowing out of the head. Secondly, avoid singing on a full stomach. With a stomach full of food, the lungs have less room to move. Also, a lot of body energy is sapped up digesting what you've eaten. You'll become short-breathed and start to force. Never eat ice cream or drink very cold drinks before you sing. It'll chill the throat and the muscles won't respond so well. Also, avoid having very hot foods, particularly soup, before you sing. These will burn the throat linings. Nuts can cut up the throat linings, so avoid eating them before you sing also. Chocolate can line the membranes with film and make you want to clear your throat a lot, so don't have that either. Don't talk too much before singing. It tires the voice. When one particular set of muscles gets overtired from speaking, it's going to affect the singing voice as well. A great many professional singers, especially tenors and sopranos who have to sing a lot of high notes in performance, cut down in their speaking on the days that they have to perform. I've even heard of singers refusing to be interviewed for publicity on the days of performance in order to keep the voice as fresh as possible for the evening performance. Whatever you do, avoid being in situations where you have to talk above loud, especially amplified music to be heard. That is, unless you want to ruin your voice. Don't go outside and breathe in the cold air after singing unless you want a sore throat either. If you do need to go out in the cold air afterwards, for instance in order to go home after a performance, wrap a scarf around and cover your mouth. Keep away from drafts. Don't sing after travelling long distances. The body wearies, and when the body feels weary, it makes it harder for you to sing well. Don't sing too early in the morning. A lot of singers, especially those with high voices, don't start exercising the voice until they've been out of bed for several hours. Most of us have a lot of phlegm in our throats in the mornings, which for some reason doesn't seem to fully clear away till we've been up for a while. However, a short afternoon nap doesn't seem to affect the voice at all. In fact, I find a short nap a few hours before singing is good for the voice. This is mainly because of its power to relax the body. If the voice isn't working well, try to avoid coughing and clearing the throat. This is like sandpapering the vocal cords. And finally, it's best not to practice when you're tired or sick. Don't forget that resting the voice is also healthy for it, especially when you've been over-exercising it. Before we complete this video, I want to ensure that you remember these 10 essential principles of singing. Number 1 is this. Remember that God designed the voice production mechanism and that He needs no physical help from us in order to produce the best sounds. If you can hear the birds singing in the background, you'll notice that they're singing effortlessly, and that's the way that we should sing. Number 2. Prepare to sing by opening up the resonating cavities as you inhale gently through the nose, into the brain and down into the lungs. You can do this by imagining that you're smelling the flowers. Number 3. Tell yourself that you have no neck, jaw or tongue. Number 4. Mentally hear the sound that you're about to produce before you make it. Number 5. Make sure that the first note that you sing in any phrase in any song is as good as possible. Number 6. Check that the sounds that you're producing are activated from above the bridge of the nose and between the eyes. Number 7. Always draw the sounds out, never push them out. Number 8. Make sure that the voice is anchored to the diaphragm. Number 9. Keep both the voice and the body in continual motion, no matter how slight it is. And number 10. Sing from the heart.